Good morning, everybody. We're due to get started in a couple of minutes. I can see we've still got people fairly regularly joining the webinar, so I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes to let people who are dialing in to do so. In the meantime, just a bit of housekeeping. Everybody is on mute currently, so we won't be able to hear you talking. But if you've got a question, if you're having any technical difficulties, you can email info@thebiggive.org.uk, and they are picking up the emails this morning and can help you in terms of accessing the webinar. If you've got questions as we go, there is a questions function on the right hand side of your screen. There's sort of 4 icons, and the one down the bottom looks like a speech bubble with a question mark. You can use that to raise questions. The wider audience won't see the questions unless we respond to it, and what we will probably do is respond verbally to questions as we go, and then do a written summary of the questions and answers following the webinar. So as I say, I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes for those that are still joining to come on, and we'll get started shortly. I'm just going to pop myself on mute, so don't worry if you hear the line go silent. Okay, so the numbers seem to have settled down. We haven't. We had quite a flurry of people joining just in the last minute or so. So we'll make a start. Welcome to the Big Give and the FSI's webinar on supporting you to effectively market your Christmas Challenge campaign. And in this webinar, this is the second in the series. We're focusing particularly on audiences and networks, and developing your fundraising proposition. Just a little bit of background. My name's Janine. I work for the Foundation for Social Improvement. I'm the head of development there. So I've worked with lots of organisations, and we've been working with the Big Give to develop the marketing guidebook, which you will have access to from your dashboard. So if you haven't downloaded a copy of it yet, I'd recommend just quickly logging into your account and accessing your dashboard to download and print off a copy. We will be referring to it, and there's some of the content of the guidebook, but also some useful prompts and exercises for you in there to help you think about as you start planning your campaign. We've got further webinars coming up, so there's some links in the presentation, so do keep an eye on those and sign up for the future ones that we've got as well. So today's format, it's really quite straightforward. 2 sections, around 20 minutes of presentation, and at the end of that, 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A for each section. So I'm going to try and answer as many questions as I can verbally as we go. I might group them if they're quite similar, but also if there are some questions that are less on the subject and more to do with the technicalities of how the Big Give works, or how the Christmas Challenge works, I will leave those for the Big Give team to respond to in writing to you all. So as I mentioned at the start, you won't be able to speak over the line, and we've got quite a number of people on the call, so we have muted everybody, but you can use that question function to raise questions, and we will send a copy of the slides and the question and answer following the webinar. I'd recommend using the time wisely, so make sure you ask lots of questions, and as I say, use your guidebook to jot down notes in each section for your charity. So, a couple of things first of all, just a quick reminder, campaign dates, 12 p.m. on 28th of November, which is Giving Tuesday, through to midday on Tuesday the 5th of December, so very time-defined period for the campaign. Your dashboard is the place to log into to access lots of resources to help you market the campaign. So you can log into your charity account and then click the black button that says Christmas Challenge Dashboard. And just a reminder of how the matching works, there's a diagram on the screen in front of you. So just remembering that you've got your matching pot, which is made up of champion funding, if you were successful enough to receive the champion funding, as well as the pledges that you've received. When the campaign launches, the donations are first doubled by the pledges. And then once the pledges have been exhausted, the champion funds are accessed. So those pledge funds will be used first and foremost to match donations. As I say, if you've got any questions about how the campaign actually works as opposed to the planning and marketing of it, do submit those questions to info@thebiggive.org. I'm just going to check because I've just seen a question pop up saying the webinar is just a black screen at the moment and should you just be seeing slides. I'm just going to double check that with one of my colleagues who is logged in as well, just to see what they are seeing. Okay, so we've just had some feedback from a couple of questions coming through and from the team that the slides are either just showing a black screen or the first slide. So let me just try that again. Bear with me one moment. I'm just going to mute myself. Right, so I think that should have addressed it. You should be seeing a slide that says, first of all, at the top of it, and it's got the diagram. So I think for a moment there that the screen had just temporarily frozen. So moving on. The first part of today's webinar is on audiences and networks. And I suppose why this is important, and if you joined us in the first webinar, it's really important not to have a one-size-fits-all approach with your campaign communications. It's also about identifying as wide a reach and audience as possible so that you can make sure that you get your message out there as widely as possible, because that's what's going to help you really maximize the success of your campaign. And then from that, you can start to tailor your messaging, your proposition, and also think about what are the best promotional channels and the best ways that I can actually engage with these particular audiences. You can really maximize your fundraising efforts by identifying the sources of support and connections and influence around your charity and the people involved with it. And network mapping is a really valuable tool to help you identify those potential sources of support and networks. Now, we give you instructions in your guidebook on pages 16, 17 and 18, but I thought for the purposes of today it might be useful to talk through an example. Start by, and really this kind of exercise works with a team of people, getting a diverse group of people around the table. You might want to think about whether you include your board or your senior management team as well, depending on the size and nature of your organisation. So my first step would be to begin with your existing contact group. So this is by far the best method of establishing your current contacts and their current networks. Think about the key groups of people and categories to add to the map. So I've put some examples that you can see on your screen in front of you. It might be trustees, might be volunteers, you might have corporate partners, you might think about your current donors, and you might be splitting those lists of current donors even further. So you might be looking at different levels of giving, for example. In this particular example that I've given, the current donors have been split between those giving less than £50 a year, those giving £50 to £250 a year, and those giving more than £250 a year. Now, obviously, your segments for your charity will depend on what the profile is of people who are giving to you. So in step 2, it's then a case of thinking about the existing contacts that you've got within that team that you've got around the table. So within that, it's helpful to identify, first of all, the name, but also who in your organisation has that relationship with that person. And if the contact is a corporate or another organisation, maybe a funder, try to identify who in that organisation you have the relationship with. I think that's a really important point, is that relationships tend to be with people, and therefore it's really important to identify that key contact. You could also start to add your wish lists under each category. So in this particular example, if you look at the corporate partners down the bottom, this charity has identified Acme Corporation on their wish list. So someone that they would really like to find a connection with and would really like to get involved in their Christmas Challenge campaign. So it's important to remember when you're doing this, most new donors will begin their relationship with a cause through an existing relationship, either through you or through someone who knows you. So that's why we're starting to identify the existing contacts and connections that we've got. Now, as a next step, start to think about the different connections between those who are warm and those who are on your wish list. This can help you identify who is best to approach that person, particularly for personal approaches like telephone calls and meetings. So in this particular example, you can see I've drawn a solid line going down from Mark Smith, who is one of my volunteers, down to Acme Corporation, who are on my wish list, because he actually works for them. And he's going to ask the management team to do a sponsored rowing challenge in the main lobby area with the donation double message and link sent out to all the employees and donation stations set up on tablets around the lobby area. In another example, Annabelle, who's the trustee for the charity, knows Shirley through having met at a number of the charity's events. So it's not there that it's a personal or professional connection, but she's been identified as having that strongest relationship with the individual. She's going to call Shirley because Shirley's been identified as a potentially high value giver, so is going to have a more personalised approach to the by the charity. And Annabelle is going to call Shirley about the opportunity to have her donations doubled and make a donation request of Shirley around the campaign. In the third example we've got here, Ali is a current donor who knows Julia. So with the support of the charity's fundraising manager, she is going to reach out to Julia. So remembering that Julia is a lapsed donor, Ali is a current high value donor. And Ali is going to reach out to Julia to ask her to consider supporting the charity again, particularly during the challenge, and the messaging being around, again, having her donations doubled during this period. So this is just a couple of examples to help illustrate how network mapping, particularly for your significant prospects, can help you to identify potential routes in and connections that you might not have otherwise been aware of. So the value of getting those people around the table is really important. And this is, of course, only the first step in the process. For significant prospects, you might want to think about what they will give. So first and foremost, what level of financial support you are asking for from this donor, so what amount. Remembering that the maximum match donation is £5,000 per donor per project, and the minimum is £5. In addition to donating to your campaign, though, there are other ways that your potential donor or contact could support you. So it might be that they could bring their passion, they could inspire others to donate to your campaign, perhaps doing a piece to camera or speaking at an event that you're holding. Maybe they've got really great connections, so they could have links and networks and help you to get your message out to a much wider audience. They might be people with influence, so they might be influential amongst your target audience and could be featured in a story or a campaign message. They might bring expertise to the table, so maybe they could give you some pro bono support to help you plan and deliver your campaign. Maybe there's someone in your network map who could give you marketing and PR support or help you to design some images that you could be using for Twitter and social media. You also want to think about the other side of the relationship, because all relationships are two-way. So think about your supporters' motivations. And these can be complex. It's not always easy to know, but it can be helpful to consider the profile of your donor in order to target and tailor your message. So thinking about things like, have they given before? Maybe connecting them back to the impact of their previous giving. What level they've given at before. So actually, would that opportunity to double their donation be a great inspiration to donate at a slightly higher level or donate again? Do they have a strong affinity with your cause? Maybe it strikes a chord because they've been affected personally by the issue. And do they support a particular campaign or project of yours? If so, you might target your messaging around this particular initiative. So let's look at a quick case study. So Clean Break were one of the Challenge Award winners last year, and there is a link where you can read about their experience on the Big Give website. You'll probably not be able to click on the links from your screen currently, but when we send you the download of the presentations, you'll be able to. But just to summarise that, Clean Break in their submission described how stakeholder engagement and involving stakeholders in the planning process was a really key success factor for them. So for them, they got together the board, their development committee and staff members and approached them with information about their strategy for a Christmas campaign. Each individual received really clear communications about the advantage of partnering with the Big Give and the anticipated benefit of doubling donations and linking with Giving Tuesday to raise the Christmas campaign's profile. These individuals also got clear direction in how the process for matching donation worked to make sure that they felt confident in communicating with their contacts. They also received outline emails, tweets and texts that they could adapt and use to send to their friends, families and contacts. They identified a number of key groups, including, so I've mentioned the board and development committee, but also staff members, influencers and service users as well. Where appropriate, bespoke emails were drafted by the development team for circulation by the relevant member to help make sure that opportunities were not missed and that clear and concise and consistent messages were circulated, and also helping others in the organisation and helping those groups of people to get the message out because they wanted to do it in a time-efficient way as possible so it didn't impact unnecessarily on their own work and personal commitments. High-profile individuals identified as influencers were each approached individually and asked to support the campaign by endorsing the work and raising the profile publicly. And service users at Clean Break, so the students participating in their programs, played a really important role in building their campaign materials. They developed a promotion video, they provided personal testimonies and recorded short video footage. So rather than just asking them to make a call for support, Clean Break asked for their personal endorsement, providing a genuine call to action and evidence of the need and achievements of Clean Break. The students also took on roles as ambassadors, promoting the work at key events such as the Information Day that was held during the campaign for an invited audience of prospective partner organisations, students and delivery staff. So you can see there, by considering those different groups and thinking about what could they bring to the campaign, and thinking in this case I think really nicely illustrates the fact that people can contribute beyond a financial donation. Obviously, you know, reaching your campaign target is a paramount importance, but think about how you can use your networks to reach a wider audience and to get your messaging out there. Right, at this point, I'm going to pause for questions on anything relating to the audiences and network side of things. So thinking about what we've just covered around network mapping, around identifying your audiences, and mapping out those networks. What I'm going to do is just pop myself on mute so that you don't hear sort of competing noise in the background. So don't be afraid if you hear silence. We haven't gone blank. I'm just popping myself on pause for a moment or two. So just a reminder, you can submit your questions via the, if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, there should be a speech bubble with a question mark on it. And I've just seen a question pop in via email. I'm just going to pop myself on mute again while I read that, and I'll come back to you. So the question I've had is, we don't have current individual supporters and we've tried to think outside the box but are still struggling. What more can we do? I'd be really creative about how you think about your network. So even without current individual supporters, if you go back to that network mapping, you can see there are at least half a dozen categories that didn't involve people who were currently giving or had given previously. So start with your trustees and staff to see what networks they've got, involve your volunteers, and involve your service users or beneficiaries as well. Again, you've got to make a decision about whether it's appropriate to make them a direct ask for the campaign. It may be that it's not appropriate, but think about how you can reach them. I've had another question through. We've just launched an appeal to our donor base, but would also like to engage them in the big give. How soon is too soon to recontact those donors with a new message? I think it's quite important to make sure that you acknowledge any previous giving and demonstrate the impact of that gift before you go back to a donor with a secondary ask. So provided in your communications you've had enough time to thank them appropriately, to make sure that they feel the impact of that donation, so that they don't feel that they're constantly being asked for money, is really important. And acknowledge that previous giving in the email, and perhaps highlight the fact that it's an opportunity to have their donation matched. I've got another question here around, is it likely that people currently unaware of a company might flick through to the Big Give and decide to donate? It would be great if that did happen, but I would say it's probably not that likely. I think remembering that there are a number of organisations participating in the Big Give, and also the fact that that coming back to that core principle, your new supporters are likely to come on board because they've got a personal connection to the cause, or because someone they know supports you. And of course the Big Give will be promoting the campaign, but charities should focus their efforts on getting supporters to give and see any additional donations that come about from the Big Give's marketing as a bonus. There's a question here about if we're reaching new supporters, how do we ensure that we comply with fundraising regulations when asking by email? I wouldn't suggest necessarily adding new cold contacts, people who have not opted into your communications, to an email ask. But I know that the Big Give is preparing some information to share with challenge participants on fundraising regulations and opting in. I've got a question here. How would we approach attempting to re-engage with our database of lapsed donors, taking into account the need for supporters to opt into fundraising messages? Well, I think you have to decide, you know, how far back. You know, one of the core principles of having that data and people having opted in is that, you know, if they haven't donated to you for 10 years and they've never really engaged with anything that you sent them before, they're probably not necessarily someone that's going to reconnect through a Christmas challenge. But, you know, you might have some donors that gave to you in last year's campaign, for example, or who gave to you 2 years ago, but actually haven't been approached since. So I think identifying that as a particular group is really important, and I think, you know, there is no one-size-fits-all approach for every charity. You have to look at the group, think about the degree, you know, how long has it been since they've been lapsed, what's the degree that that they are engaging with you, and is there something that you could do that might re-engage them? So could you share a video or impact, and showing the difference that they've made and acknowledging the support, even if it was a while ago, the support that they've given in the past. We've had a question through about, is this a good opportunity to get people who've shown an interest but not yet donated to make a first donation? Absolutely, and making the most of the fact that it's a match-funded campaign, that they'll get their donations doubled. The entry point is quite accessible. The minimum donation is £5. So you might want to think about, you know, different suggested levels of donation linked to some tangible impact on your particular beneficiary group. We've got a couple of questions here around the optimum time for a press campaign and for social media. I would say those are definitely, you should be thinking about those as part of your communications planning. We'll actually be spending a bit more time on those on the webinar next week on the communication channels. So I'm going to come back to those. We'll come back to those and cover them in more depth in the next webinar, so I'd encourage you to join that. And another question here, in thinking about our different audiences and trying to tailor our communications, what would you suggest we think about? Sometimes we find it hard to differentiate what resonates with different audiences. That's a really interesting one. If you were on the webinar that we did, the first webinar, we looked at an example of iRise, who were one of the Challenge Award winners last year. They actually spoke to their target audiences and asked them what resonated with them. So they described holding focus groups. You could do something in a much more informal way. Perhaps, you know, just picking up the phone, having a coffee with some of your existing supporters, those that are close to you. You might also want to look at, if you use a mail, you know, an online mailing system, something like MailChimp or Vertical Response or similar, have a look at your past email campaigns and see what's actually been successful, what's tended to get people engaged and open and reading. I think, you know, it's about understanding what resonates with supporters, but I think one of the things we do know is that time and time again the research says that personal stories are what engage and connect people. We've had a couple of technical questions through on opting in, fundraising regulation, and the impact of GDPR. It's outside of the scope of today, so I'm going to those questions will be responded to by the Big Give. So I'm going to, I've just had one more question pop in. How long before the live campaign would you start approaching people to ask for a donation? Again, we'll talk about planning in your communication channels and different approaches. and it will vary, but you'd want to send probably a save the date out, get the date in people's diaries over the next few weeks, maybe something on a few days before the launch, a reminder, something on launch day, and perhaps a progress update throughout the campaign. But it will depend what channels you're using, because if, for example, you're using press, you would need to think about publication and copy deadlines. If you're using social media, it's much more immediate. So they will vary, and we will cover those in more depth on the promotional channels webinar next week. So just a reminder on GDPR, do email the Big Give with any questions, but just be aware that you will need to do your own planning around this to ensure that you are compliant. I'm going to move on now to the second part of today's webinar on your fundraising proposition. So we've talked about already how powerful personal stories are, and really it's about demonstrating the impact that your organisation has on someone's life, or it may be, depending on what your cause type is, it might be on a community, it might be on a family, it might be on part of the environment or animals. But those personal stories are the things that grab attention. I think there's a real, a real opportunity here with the fact that donations are doubled. There was some research conducted that showed that 84% of donors were more likely to give in a match funding campaign, and 36% of donors are likely to give more. And that's certainly been the experience when we look at the stories of the Challenge Award winners from last year, when they looked at their analytics and found that actually, their average donation was twice as high as what, before you take the match funding into account, was twice as high as what their typical donations were for a campaign. So it is a powerful motivator. So it's useful to remind people of that. Make sure you include a clear call to action. It's really important to actually ask for a donation, and it can be helpful to suggest, depending again on your audiences, you might suggest a level or you might suggest a number of levels. It depends on whether you're sort of reaching a lot of different audience segments or one in particular. I'd invest some time in advance in the lead up to the campaign and getting your content ready. So really getting that bank of content and stories and case studies in place. And finally, keep it visual. So again, there's a lot of research that shows that images help engagement, so particularly on social media, images and video are really useful. And there's some really fantastic tools out there to help you with those sorts of things. Canva, so C-A-N-V-A, is a really simple sort of graphic design, free to access tool that you can use to create images. You can, there's a site called Magisto, magisto.com, which is a really good free app to create animations using still photos, and a range of others, PicMonkey, GIMP, iStock and Shutterstock, good sources to get stock photography. If you struggle with your beneficiary group to show photos of the individuals, think about different ways that you could use images and videos. So I've seen some really good examples for where a charity working with very vulnerable young women, where it wasn't appropriate at all to use images of the service users, instead showed pictures of the artwork that they'd produced through an art therapy project that they'd been running. So there are other ways to bring the work to life that doesn't necessarily involve having a photo of your beneficiary. And it's really important to think as you start to plan your different content and your fundraising proposition, how you're actually going to get people's attention. So captivating them. And there's different ways you can do this. You can use a killer fact, so that might be a key statistic that's relatable to your audience. It could be an image, it could be the story of an individual, it could be a quote, or a question to get attention. So, for example, Oxfam annually develops a set of killer facts which translate potentially overwhelming information. So, you know, it's about translating that information into a way that's accessible to their audience, so something that's more tangible and attention-grabbing. So, for example, in 2013, their key killer fact was the top 100 billionaires added $240 billion to their wealth in 2012, enough to end world poverty 4 times over. In 2014, again, they took that key message, but changed presented the statistic in a different way. The 85 richest people in the world own the same wealth as the poorest 3.5 billion. And then in 2015, this was the richest 1% of the world's population owns 48% of its wealth. And by 2016, they're likely to have the whole half. So that's just an example of how they've taken what could be potentially quite not overwhelming, but difficult to relate to statistics. You know, it's not talking about necessarily the bigger picture, but bringing that down to a level that's more tangible and easily connected by people. Other examples might include testimonial quotes for your organizations, maybe from one of your beneficiaries or from one of your key influencers or high-profile supporters. So actually, if you've got someone in your network who has a high profile, could they would they be willing to put a quote to the campaign, something that endorses your campaign and why people should donate to you? Using your stories, so using the story of an individual to bring to life the challenges you're addressing and the positive outcomes that you achieve. And those case studies can be a really powerful way to inspire support. I would recommend keeping it brief, focus on what's the most important elements to communicate, to share that story of the individual, the challenge, how your charity helped, and the positive future that that individual is looking forward to because of your work. You might ask a rhetorical question. There was a famous one from a fundraising campaign years ago. How do we look our children in the eyes and tell them we had a chance to change the world and didn't? So let's have a look at a few examples. So this is an example from one of the Christmas Challenge 2015 participants, use of a quote from a beneficiary and a really clear positive image as well. So this was an image that they could use on social media, it could be used on emails, and it looks like it's been sort of professionally designed. It's these sorts of images that you could quite readily create, even on, we've done it before using PowerPoint, using a PowerPoint slide, having an image in the background in a text box, and then you can convert the slide into an image file, or using some of the programs like Canva that we mentioned to do that as well. We've got a nice example here using, again, a powerful image with that key message, you know, donate on 4th and 5th December at 12 p.m. and your donation could be doubled. This is actually going back to a campaign a few years ago, so slightly different format in terms of how the Christmas Challenge was run, but the key takeaway is just that strong image to get attention. I quite like this one. Is funding one Google Doctor, getting one free. And I think it's a nice example of how this charity has probably used the values and branding of their organisation and perhaps the way that they present themselves to develop their fundraising proposition. So it's a way that that resonates with their sort of ethos and way of being. This was a nice example I found on Twitter from last year's campaign. And this was a picture of an individual who had participated in one of the charity's programs, and a quote from them. On stage, I felt like the atmosphere was calm and peaceful in my brain. And then a really clear, simple call to action: donate today and your gift will be doubled. And this is an example from Student Minds. I've embedded the video link in there if you want to watch it at a later date. But a really good example of using video, involving others in the organisation to tell the story, but also you can't quite see it on the screen, but that key statistic there about the 1 in 12. You know, so they've identified and incorporated some of their killer statistics. So having captivated your audience, you need to maintain the engagement, and that's really where interest and passion comes into play. So it's really helpful. Some tips, I suppose, would be to use active verbs, put people in your writing. So put your reader in the story, you and we and us. Using really positive declarative language to describe your charity and the work that you do. So using powerful language, strong action verbs, and putting people in the writing. And you can inspire action by making your supporter the hero of the story, really excite them about how they can make a difference and give them a range of different ways that they can support your work. A few tips: favour the short, familiar words, avoid using jargon. Do a quick jargon check. I know it sort of seems obvious, but it is well worth just reviewing all of your copy to make sure that you haven't got that stuff creeping in. I've mentioned already putting the reader in the story, making them feel part of the story. So even things like some of the emails that I saw of people, of past Christmas Challenge participants, you know, together last year we raised, it makes the reader feel like they are part of that. Those stories of individuals will really help you convey that passion and bring your work to life. So yes, the statistics are great, but actually 2 or 3 strong stories of individuals or beneficiaries would be really, really helpful. And make sure you end with a powerful call to action. So make it really clear what you want from your audience as a result. So a case study, just to look at briefly, to help sort of highlight some of these tips. Send a Cow actually won the Christmas Challenge award last year for their campaign. So again, you can read more about their experience on the link. And they focused on developing a central fundraising concept, really designed to appeal to their existing audiences. So they told the story through the lives of Nasimu and his family, who had built their cowshed but were waiting for their cow to arrive. Now, they knew that many supporters give to Send a Cow because they're convinced by their development methods. So they knew that their audiences would respond well to a simple, tangible ask. So in this case, they framed it around providing cows to waiting families. They also felt that the urgency around the family who were waiting for their cow chimed in well with the time sensitivity of the Christmas Challenge, the fact that it's quite a short time window, and that would provide a sense of urgency, which combined with the opportunity to match funding would prove compelling for their donors. So they worked across their team to develop a plan for each marketing group based on the channels that would be most relevant to those groups. And they split their activity into 3 different phases: a save the date phase, a challenge launch, so on launch day, and a last chance, including activity across mail, email, social media, and Google Grant advertising as well. All of the activities drove the response via a shortened link, a bit.ly link, to the donation page, directly to the donation page on the Big Give site. So what they were doing was driving people directly there so that they could so that they were removing the number of steps someone had to take to make a donation. And by having consistent messaging across all of their channels, they actually increased their overall response. So they combined a direct mail pack with email, amplified that through social media, and were using all of these different touch points to engage supporters, but the core message was consistent across all of those different platforms. Their approach was really effective. They actually reached their target in less than 3 hours, and were able to spend time raising additional funds for the duration of the campaign. And you can see here on this slide some examples of the appeal collateral, if you like. They created a really clear identity for the appeal using the same name and logo and central case study and photography across all of their communications. They developed an appeal pack that they sent to individual givers, including a bright yellow flyer, which you can see down on the bottom right of your screen, ensuring people would know about the match opportunity but could also make donations offline to the appeal after the challenge if they missed it. And then they adapted elements of that pack and included them in personalised updates to high-value donors. So they really concentrated on having a core message and then thinking about how they tailored that message without losing the core thread for different audiences. So I'm going to move on briefly and just offer the opportunity for people to ask questions on the proposition. I'm going to again pop myself on mute, so don't be afraid if you don't hear anything for the next minute or two, and I will just review the questions and respond to them verbally. Okay, so just responding to two questions. The first one I've got here is, bear with me. This charity has a pledge for 1,000 and the champion fund is also 1,000, so the potential is for 4,000. And as a small charity, this will be the biggest fundraiser they've done. So they want to know how they balance hitting their double money target of 2,000 while trying to raise as much as possible, even if unmatched. We don't want people to see that we've reached our target and then not bother to donate. When you've reached your target, on the Christmas Challenge website, there will be a message that comes up to say that the match target has been met, but it will encourage them to go on and make an unmatched donation, that those charities that have reached their target will be nominated for or entered into a Challenge Champion Award, and one of the criteria on that Challenge Champion Award is how much additional unmatched funding you've raised over and above your target. I think also it's worthwhile having maybe some communications drafted for either scenario. So you might give a midway progress update, which is, we're very nearly there. You might also have something drafted which is amazing, we've reached our target in 3 days, but here's why you should keep on donating. So help us, you know, we've now secured enough to support 50 families, but we've got ambitions for 80. You know, things like that that will still encourage people to give. We've had a question about, we always just ask people to donate and tell them it will be doubled. Should we think more carefully about what makes us stand out? And that's very much linked to a second question to say, we don't have much time to do a lot of work on this, but feel like we're missing a whole piece of work. What should be the minimum we do in developing a proposition? If you have a look in the first part of your Christmas Challenge guidebook, there is a section on page 7 to 9 that gets you thinking about the different elements of a strong fundraising proposition. So thinking about, you know, what's the need or issue or challenge that you're addressing, who's addressing it, what's done to, what is it that you're actually doing to address the issue, and who's the recipient, who's that end beneficiary who experiences the benefit. And there's a useful checklist on page 9 just to think about the other elements, you know, a first-person story or quote, the fact that donations can be doubled, and a clear ask. So I don't think this is something that has to take a huge amount of time. I think, you know, you could get a couple of heads around a table and have a bit of a brainstorming session and just think about how you can bring your work to life, and maybe that is through using images and quotes. We've had a question, can we confirm the software for animating still photographs? It was called Magisto, M-A-G-I-S-T-O, and it's a free app. They hit their target in 3 hours, but what was their target? I would have to double check the full case study, but you'll have the details if you have a look at the website and the link there. You'll see what that was. Right, just a couple more questions coming through. I'm just going to pop myself on mute again. Won't be one moment. Okay, so we've got time for a couple more questions, if anyone has them. Just a reminder, we will do a written follow-up with the Q&A as well. So if you didn't, if for some reason we've missed your question, or if you didn't quite catch the answer, do keep an eye out for that. We'll also share the slides as well. Okay, so just to finish on some final tips from the Big Give. Think big. Try and reach as many different groups of people as possible to help you hit your target. So think about whether there's any new avenues that you could try out. Maybe if this is the second or third time that you've done it, what was particularly successful for you, and is there anything new that you could be doing? Focus on segmenting your work and be really meticulous in planning the different groups and what you expect them to contribute. What you want to do is avoid as much as possible any big surprises in the live week. So invest that time in planning early on and getting all of your ducks in a row. Consider your proposition carefully. So think about what resonates with donors about your work and your stories. It can be really helpful to actually get the perspective of people outside of your organisation, maybe people who support you, maybe speaking to some of your volunteers about what resonates with them. Just a reminder that matching starts at midday on Tuesday the 28th of November on Giving Tuesday, so make the most of the fact that it's on that day, use the hashtag, and matching is only available until the campaign closes on the 5th of December at midday. Pledge funds are used to double donations first, so if you've had champion funds, make sure your plans enable you to raise enough donations to access your champion funds. If you've got any questions, contact info@thebiggive.org.uk, and do join us. There's still time to sign up for Webinar 3 on promotional channels, which will be taking place at 12 o'clock noon on Tuesday the 24th of October. So thank you all for today. I'll remain on the call just in case we get any final questions coming through. But otherwise, do contact info@thebiggive.org.uk with any questions. And thank you all for joining us today. We've just had a question about how donors are thanked afterwards, and whether there's an automated thank you email from the Big Give. Yes, there are, but we would really encourage everybody participating in the challenge to think about their thanking and follow-up and making sure it's personalised, and that they're thinking about that in terms of your communication planning as well. So, you know, it's those post-campaign follow-ups that are really important to connect people to the impact that their donation has made and how ultimately that's going to impact on your cause or your beneficiary. We've also just had a question on when we'll get the when we'll send out a copy of the presentations. Just to say we haven't yet sent the presentations for last week, but they will be distributed over the next few days.